Hi guys. Men from Mars. There was no floating inside the space hotel. The gravity making machine saw to that. So once the docking had been triumphantly achieved, Mr. Wonka, Charlie, Grandpa Joe, Mr. and Mrs. Bucket were able to walk out of the great glass elevator into the lobby of the hotel. As for Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina and Grandma Josephine, none of them had had their feet on the ground for over 20 years, and they certainly weren't going to change their habit now. So when the floating stopped, they all three plopped right back on the bed again and insisted that the bed with them in it be pushed into the space hotel. Charlie gazed around the huge lobby. On the floor there was thick green carpet. 20 tremendous chandeliers hung shimmering from the ceiling. The walls were covered with valuable pictures, and there were big, soft armchairs all over the place. At the far end of the room, there were the doors of 5 lifts. The group stared in silence at all this luxury. No one dared speak. Mr. Wonka had warned them that every word they uttered would be picked up by Space Control in Houston, so they had better be careful. A faint humming noise came from somewhere below the floor, but that only made the silence more spooky. Charlie took hold of Grandpa Joe's hand and held it tight. He wasn't sure he liked this very much. They had broken into the greatest machine ever built by man, the property of the United States government, and they were discovered and captured, as they surely must be in the end. What would happen to them then? Jail for life? Yes, or something worse. Mr. Wonka was writing on a little notepad. He held up the pad. It said, "Anybody hungry?" The 3 old ones in the bed began waving their arms and nodding and opening and shutting their mouths. Mr. Wonka turned the paper over. On this other side, it said, "The kitchens of this hotel are loaded with luscious food, lobster, steak, ice cream. We shall have a feast to end all feasts." Suddenly, a tremendous booming voice came out of the loudspeaker, hidden somewhere in the room. "Attention!" boomed the voice, and Charlie jumped. So did Grandpa Joe. Everybody jumped, even Mr. Wonka. "Astronauts, this is Space Control in Houston, Texas, USA. You are trespassing on American property. You are ordered to identify yourselves immediately. Speak now." "Shh," said Mr. Wonka, fingers to his lips. There followed a few seconds of awful silence. Nobody moved except Mr. Wonka, who kept saying, "Shh." "Who are you?" boomed the voice from Houston, and the whole world heard it. "I repeat, who are you?" shouted the urgent, angry voice, and 500 million people crouched in front of their television sets, waiting for an answer to come from the mysterious strangers inside the space hotel. The television was not able to show a picture of these mysterious strangers. There was no camera in there to record the scene. Only the words came through. The TV watchers saw nothing but the outside of the giant hotel in orbit, photographed, of course, by Shuckworth, Shanks, and Showler, who were following behind. For half a minute, the world waited for a reply. But no reply came. "Speak!" boomed the voice, getting louder and louder, and ending in a fearful, frightening shout that rattled Charlie's eardrums. "Speak! Speak! Speak!" Grandma Georgina shot under the sheet. Grandma Josephine stuck her fingers in her ears. Grandpa George buried his head in the pillow, and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, both petrified, were once again in each other's arms. Charlie was clutching Grandpa Joe's hand, and the 2 of them were staring at Mr. Wonka and begging him with their eyes to do something. Mr. Wonka stood very still, and although his face looked calm, you can be quite sure his clever, inventive brain was spinning like a dynamo. "This is your last chance," boomed the voice. "We are asking you once more, who are you? Reply immediately. If you do not reply, we shall be forced to regard you as dangerous enemies. We shall then press the emergency freezer switch, and the temperature in this space hotel will drop to minus 100 degrees centigrade. All of you will be instantly deep frozen. You have 15 seconds to speak. After that, you will turn into icicles. 1, 2... "Grandpa," whispered Charlie as the counting continued. "We must do something. We must quick. 6, 7, 8... Mr. Wonka had not moved. He was still gazing straight ahead, still quite cool, perfectly expressionless. Charlie and Grandpa Joe were staring at him in horror. Then all at once they saw the tiny twinkling wrinkles of a smile appear around the corners of his eyes. He sprang to life. He spun around on his toes, skipped a few paces across the floor, and then in a frenzied, unearthly sort of scream, he cried, "Thimble Freeze!" The loudspeaker stopped counting. There was silence. All over the world, there was silence. Charlie's eyes were riveted on Mr. Wonka. There he is, dancing and spinning around. He was going to speak again. He was taking a deep breath. "Bungo bunt!" he screamed. He put so much force into his voice that the effort lifted him right up onto his tips of his toes. "Bungo bunny! Dat foo dunny! You be loony!" Again the silence. The next time Mr. Wonka spoke, the words came out so fast and sharp and loud they looked like bullets from a machine gun. "Zunk, zunk, 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 zunk," he barked. The noise echoed around and around the lobby of the Space Hotel. It echoed around the world. Mr. Wonka now turned and faced the far end of the lobby where the loudspeaker voice had come from. He walked a few paces forward as a man would, perhaps who wanted a more intimate conversation with his audience. And this time the tone was much quieter. The words came more slowly, but there was a touch of steel in every syllable. "Karasaku, Malabaku, we be guys, own you be yayaki. Alapinda, kakaminda, pants folded, if na suspenda. Fifth fuika, kanderika, weeba strong, be weak. Papakota, borovomka, very risky, povoka. Gotte kada, moons und stars, from Phoenicia, Venus, Mars. Mr. Wonka paused dramatically for a few seconds. Then he took an enormous breath, and in a wild and fearsome voice he yelled out, "Kirimimbe, zonk, Fumbalizi, zonk, Gugamiza, zonk, Vimakaka, zonk, and Apolola, zonk, zonk, zonk." The effort of all this on the world below was electric. In the control room in Houston, in the White House in Washington, in palaces and city buildings and mountain shacks from America to China to Peru, 500 million people who heard that wild and fearsome voice yelling out these strange and mystic words all shivered with fear before their television sets. Everyone began turning to everyone else and saying, "Who are they? What language is that? Where do they come from?" In the president's study in the White House, Vice President Tibbs, the members of the cabinet, the chiefs of the Army and Navy and Air Force, the sword swallower from Afghanistan, the chief financial advisor, and Mrs. Topsy-Puss, the cat, all stood tense and rigid. They were very much afraid. But the president himself kept a cool head and clear brain. "Nanny, oh Nanny, what on earth do we do now?" "I'll get you a nice warm glass of milk," said Miss Tibbs. "I hate the stuff," said the president. "Please don't make me drink it." "Summon the chief interpreter," said Miss Tibbs. "Summon the chief interpreter," said the president. "Where is he?" "Right here, Mr. President," said the chief interpreter. "What language was that creature spouting up there in space? Be quick. Was it Eskimo?" "Not Eskimo, Mr. President." "Ha! Then it was Tagalog, or either Tagalog or Ugro." "Not Tagalog, Mr. President. Not Ugro either." "Was it Tulu then? Or Chungus or Tupi?" "Definitely not Tulu, Mr. President. And I'm quite sure it wasn't Tengus or Tupi." "Don't stand there telling him what it wasn't, you idiot," said Miss Tibbs. "Tell him what it was." "Yes, ma'am, Vice President, ma'am," said the chief interpreter, beginning to shake. "Believe me, Mr. President," he went on, "it was not a language I have ever heard before." "But I thought you knew every language in the world." "I do, Mr. President." "Don't lie to me, chief interpreter. How can you possibly know every language in the world when you don't know this one?" "It is not a language of this world, Mr. President." "Nonsense, man," barked Miss Tibbs. "I understand some of it myself. These people, Miss Vice President, ma'am, have obviously tried to learn just a few of our easier words, but the rest of it is a language that has never been heard before on this earth." "Screaming scorpions!" cried the president. "You mean to tell me they could be coming from somewhere else?" "Precisely, Mr. President." "Like where?" said the president. Who knows, said the chief interpreter. But did you notice, Mr. President, how they use the words Venus and Mars? Of course I noticed it, said the president. But what's that got to do with it? Aha, I see what you're driving at. Good gracious me. Men from Mars and Venus? Said the chief interpreter. That, said the president, could make for trouble. I'll say it could, said the chief interpreter. He wasn't talking to you, said Miss Tibbs. What do we do now, General, said the president. Blow 'em up, cried the general. You're always wanting to blow things up, said the president crossly. Can't you think of something else? I like blowing things up, said the general. It makes such a lovely noise. Woof, woof. Don't be a fool, said Miss Tibbs. If you blow these people up, Mars will declare war on us. So will Venus. Quite right, Nanny, said the president. We'd be troculated like turkeys, every one of us. We'd be smashed like potatoes. I'll take 'em on, shouted the chief of the army. Shut up, snapped Miss Tibbs. You're fired. Hooray, said all the other generals. Well done, Miss Vice President, ma'am. Miss Tibbs said, we've got to treat these fellows gently. The one who spoke just now sounded extremely cross. We've got to be polite to them, butter them up, make them happy. The last thing we want is to be invaded by men from Mars. You've got to talk to them, Mr. President. Tell Houston we want another direct radio link with the Space Hotel. And hurry. Dun, 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 dun. The next one is an invitation to the White House. So, should be quite interesting. You guys draw me a picture of what you think is the best part of this chapter. Write me out a little thing that goes with it, if you're able to do that. And I'll see you guys in a bit, okay? Stay safe. Wash your hands.